Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. So glad you could join us for this episode. We're going to talk to one of the guys that's been pretty popular in a lot of groups and recently had his layout featured in Railroad Model Craftsman. Really excited to have on the show Tom Johnson. Tom, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be on. And as we always say, model railroading is fun.
It is. It's a blast. And it's a blast to talk to model railroaders in general. But I'm really excited to talk to you about the things that you have going on and, you know, the coverage that you got and the article that was put in RMC. And we'll definitely get to that, and we'll talk about the photos in there, which are amazing. But I want to start, as I seem to always do, right in the beginning, and I want to find out what got Tom Johnson hooked on model railroading.
Well, it all started back in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Where I grew up along the Nickel Plate Railroad, and I lived about a half a block away from the Nickel Plate, and I used to ride my bicycle up to the little watchman shanty and watch the local switch in town every day. The watchman, his name, everybody called him Jolly. His name was Merlin Jolly. And there was an elementary school a couple blocks away on the other side of the tracks. And in Plymouth, Indiana, where I grew up, they didn't have flashers at a lot of the crossings. So the town required the railroad to have watchmen where kids would cross the tracks to go to school. And this guy was amazing. We had a lot of oak trees on our elementary school grounds, and he would have us collect acorns and bring them to him in little brown bags, and he would take those acorns home and told us to come back the next day, and he would magically change those acorns into shelled peanuts.
Oh, no kidding. That's great.
And he would give all of his kids a bag of peanuts. And he also had a list of all of our birthdays. So anybody that had a birthday, and he had your name on the list and the date. So, you couldn't cheat him.
Right.
He would have a candy bar for you.
Yeah.
And I used to draw. I'm a 35-year art teacher, retired. And I used to draw a lot of train pictures for him, and he would hang them up in his shanty, believe it or not. I mean, there was room in there.
Sure.
And so I kind of fell in love with trains, just kind of hanging out by the Nickel Plate. We also had the double mainline Pennsylvania Railroad. And, I would watch all of the passenger trains come in and all of the freights, high-speed freights go through. And we also had a Pennsylvania Railroad branch line, the South Bend branch, that operated out of Logansport north to South Bend. And the track was very poor. The speeds were very slow, but it was kind of different, So you had the Nickel Plate, which was a secondary main line from Indianapolis to Michigan City. You had the high-speed Pennsylvania main line, and then you had this Pennsylvania branch line. And I was within 4 blocks of all of them.
Yeah, that's quite amazing. About how many trains per day were going through that area at that time? Do you on a rough idea?
Let's see. On the Nickel Plate, there were, I think there was like a through freight in the morning that went north to Michigan City. Then there was the local that came up out of Argus. And it also went up to Michigan City, and then came back to Plymouth and back to Argus. And there were a couple trains in the evening that went south out of Michigan City to, I'm guessing, either Peru or Indianapolis. And on the Pennsylvania main line, it was just, we're talking dozens and dozens of trains. And some passenger trains that would go straight through at 80 mile an hour with E units on the front end.
Wow.
There were several of them that stopped.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and then watching the trains come out of South Bend from the Studebaker plant with a lot of, as I recall, military equipment, military trucks, and things like that came out of South Bend. And when Studebaker closed, and of course the whole railroad, pretty much shut down after that. Plus, I had an uncle, my Uncle George, who was really into trains, and he purchased this American Flyer train set, a complete chest full of trains, and he would set them up in a spare bedroom in the back of my grandpa and grandma's apartment above the laundry that they ran and owned.
Yeah.
And he would set it up for all of us, nieces and nephews to come up, and we'd watch him run his trains and everything. And that got me interested in trains. And then we started talking about the HO trains in a store in downtown Plymouth, and I would run up there every day and look at the trains and dream about them. And eventually, another cousin of mine gave me a job to sweep up his barbershop every night after he closes, and paid me like $2.50 a week. And I would go up and put one of those train sets on layaway and pay that $2.50 a week until it was paid for. And my parents bought me a transformer to run the train. And this was the old Ather train set with the rubber band drive. I don't know if you remember those or not.
I've been told. I don't remember them, but I've been told. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And it was really neat at the time. And so I got into that and had a little 4x8 layout. And then eventually, when I got into high school and started going to college, I sold everything and bought a nice stereo system to put in my dorm. And didn't get back into model railroading until after I graduated and got married, and moved into our first house. And I started building that first layout that was actually in the November issue of Railroad Model Craftsman in 1985.
Yeah,
and I made the cover photo on that one. So it was kind of neat that I was in that one, and now recently, kind of putting bookends to a long career of model railroading in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's going back to you were talking about having all this and then selling it and buying the stereo. It just seems that it's funny that it seems to be a lot of model railroader story that either hit high school or college or a combination of two, and the bug doesn't go away. It just lies dormant, and it's
right.
Neat to hear how it comes back.
Yes,
and sometimes in a big way, like it did with you, coming and building not only a couple layouts. So the first one you had mentioned was, and I've done some reading on you, the first Logansport in Indiana Northern, that was covered. That was 37 years ago that you had that in Railroad Model Craftsman. Tell us a little bit more about that layout and how it came to be.
Well, we built this really small house. Everybody always called our house the little cabin on the prairie, but I mean it was it had a full basement. So we sectioned off a little corner of the basement, and it was about equivalent to the room that I'm in right now with this new layout that I have here in Florida, and it was a U shape, and I eventually expanded into the family room, and that's the layout that was in the 85 issue. Mm-hmm. Then, believe it or not, after a few years, I tore the whole layout down and I built an N scale layout in that small room. And I was very happy with it. But at that time, N scale, it just didn't run like it does today. I mean, N scale today is much better.
Let's talk about that for a second. So you had an HO scale layout and you take it down to put an N scale. What was what were you trying to, was it just that you wanted more running room? What was it that you're trying to accomplish there?
Exactly. More running room and less space. So I wanted to eliminate all of that railroad that was out of the family room and just keep it in that small room. And it worked for a while, but that HO bug just kept biting at me.
Right.
And eventually I tore it down and I rebuilt the L and IN in HO scale. And that was the one that was pretty prominent in the 90s and the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. And that railroad was the one that was in Great Model Railroads 2008.
Excellent.
And Jim Six, real good friend of mine, helped me a lot on that one. Jim has been published so many times over the years, and he's quite good at writing. So he came down and saw the layout, and he told me, he says, "You need to publish this. You need to put this in Great Model Railroads." And I thought, it's I could take it or leave. I could take or leave a lot of this published stuff, but I went along with him. He wrote the story, put it together, and was very happy with that. And then later, believe it or not, I was asked to contribute an article to a magazine in Europe. It's a German-speaking magazine. Mm-hmm. But it's called Loci, Loki.
Okay.
And this one is a special American edition, Loci America. And there were 4 of us that were chosen to have our layouts published in that issue. Mm-hmm. And they did a marvelous job with the magazine. I mean, the magazine was really high quality, and I was very impressed. Kim Nipkow was the guy that put that together. And I was really impressed with that. And, I've had a lot of photos to different magazines published here and there. Tony Custer's put a few of his, and Lance Midheim and several others. So that's kind of a history of where I've been in terms of photos of my layout or articles getting out there.
Yeah.
I've had people ask me, why don't you publish anything? Well, I guess they don't realize that I have had things, out there. But, I guess not everybody knows about them or sees them. And I don't go out of my way to advertise it either.
Well, they certainly probably want a full episode, or a full article from you, maybe more than once every 37 years too. So
yeah, probably. Yeah.
So
yeah.
So with that, where did this idea, because it seems like you've kind of picked up on it pretty quick, and then we'll move into the other layout, but even these other ones, you had the HO, you moved to N. By the way, did you sell all your HO stuff and had to reacquire it when you went back from N back to HO?
No, pretty much so. I'm horrible at that. I give a lot of stuff away.
Yeah.
And then I wind up having to buy it all back again. You're buying it new. Yeah. I kind of learned my lesson not to do that. I had a bunch of these trees that I purchased from a company called MBR, and I just changed my entire railroad to autumn to October, so that's going to be new news. Awesome. You're one of the first to hear it.
Yeah.
And I had a bunch of trees, and I was going to give them away to a Facebook friend, and for his layout, and I wound up having to back out of the deal and keep them. My wife told me, she says, why are you giving those away? She says, how many times have you given things away and then you change your mind and you wind up having to buy everything all over again? And I just, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And these things are hard to find. So, this is a situation where, I think I learned my lesson to really think things through before I start giving things away. And so I converted my layout to fall.
Oh, and I'm a big fan of fall. I'm trying to do it on my layout downstairs, and my big problem right now is shooting backdrop photos. And for yet another year in a row, I've really missed the peak color season because I put travel plans in the middle of it. So it'll be yet another year because I really had this desire to shoot my own backdrop photos, but doing autumn's a challenge because, again, you've only got a small window to make sure that you get what you want to get,
right.
or you got to start heading farther south and kind of chase the color as it goes south. But
yes,
there'll be yet another year before I get backdrop photos up on my layout. But nonetheless, autumn is really a beautiful time to model. And there's just all the colors and whatnot. So I'm looking forward to seeing some photos of that now. And you certainly can take some photos. And let's jump real quick to the article. Your daughter can take some photos.
Oh yes, she purchased this really fancy camera. Yeah, the megapixels that this camera has is enormous, and it's really cool because she just simply set the camera up on a tripod, and she was able to take her finger and touch the screen on the camera 20, 30 times.
Yeah.
And the camera automatically took all of those pictures, just bam, 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 took them all the way through. And then you just simply upload them to your favorite photo program, whatever that is, and drag them into Helicon Focus.
Yep.
Hit render, and within about 3 seconds, it's done.
Yep, stacks them right up. Yeah, that's amazing.
Now since then, I found a program that I put on my iPhone, and James McNabb was the guy that kind of got me onto that one, and it's called Camera Pixels.
Okay.
And I can kind of do the same thing now on my iPhone. Put it on a tripod. I just simply go through and just click on the one button that says focus bracket. And then I click on another one. How many photos do I want to take? 15, 20. And I just hit the 5 or 10 second timer, hit the button, and it counts down and just takes all those photos, one after another. And then I do the same thing. I upload them to a program and then drag them into Helicon Focus and hit render, and it's done. But I have found that it's not perfect. And if I do like 20 exposures, I'll go back and I'll click on each exposure. And if it's really blurry everywhere, I get rid of it.
Right.
And I'll bet you about half or more than half of those 20 photos were not that great. They weren't worth keeping. So I got rid of all those, and I just kept everything that showed a degree of focus in some parts of the photo. And that really helped. I think I learned a lot right there that sometimes you have to get rid of some of the photos. And so I'm quite happy with the quality that I'm getting with my iPhone.
Oh, the capabilities of these smartphones now and the cameras are just amazing to a point
right.
where, I've got 2 DSLRs and I'm just like, sometimes it's not always the equipment. It really is a photographic eye, and it's the right settings and lighting.
Yes, yes.
And if you can get those right, and then, these photos, I really want to say this, and I want to get your daughter's name right. It's Carrie. You can go ahead with the last name because I'll probably botch it.
Okay, the last name is pronounced Gels.
Gels. Okay, so
Gels.
Yep. So Carrie, your daughter, did the photos for your article here, as we mentioned, and I can just imagine how much fun that must have been working with your daughter to put this together and put the article together.
Yes, it was a lot of fun. She did a great job, and she did a lot of Photoshop also. I mean, you render them in Helicon Focus, but there's still a degree of Photoshop that you have to do. Right. We if there's a little bit of the fascia showing at the bottom, we'll Photoshop that out. Or if for some reason the very top trim of my sky backdrop is showing, we'll Photoshop that out.
Yeah.
I know sometimes people like to see that stuff because it gives them an idea on how narrow your layout is. And I understand that. And sometimes I do leave my photos alone and I don't Photoshop those little things out. But other times, I want the photo to look as real as possible. So I get rid of any fascia or any backdrop that's showing. Yeah, and she had a problem in some places where something wasn't quite focused as good as she would like it, so she had to do some work. Like in one of the photos, I think there was a Pennsylvania Railroad iron crossbuck, and it was pretty sharp, but when she originally did the photo, it was not that sharp. I can't remember which one it was. It was one of the photos, maybe it was one with the GP7 that was just starting to go across.
Yeah, it looks like it's on the bottom of page 39 for those that are going to pick up, and they should. If you're not, if you're not subscribed to Railroad Model Craftsman, I don't know what to say to you other than get yourself subscribed. It's an amazing magazine.
I know.
And get your hands on the October issue where Tom's got this, because the photos are just stunning.
Well, thank you. And you know what? And I've got to give Otto Vondrak a lot of credit too. He did an amazing job putting this together. I mean, I supplied the photos and the text and pretty much in the order that you see it, but he went through and reworded a few things, and the way he put it was a lot better than the way I put it, for sure. I don't consider myself the best out there in terms of writing, even though I'm a retired art teacher. We got to remember, it's art teacher, not language arts teacher.
That's right.
But he did an amazing job with it. I'm just very thankful of the terrific work that he did on that article for me.
Yeah, Otto's a really great guy.
Oh,
Super supportive of those that want to share their layouts or their stories and whatnot. So yeah, very great guy. But you did set him up well. I mean, the information you provided and then the photographs. So as far as composition, who was it? Kind of you and your daughter working together to decide, or did you kind of have some ideas, or did she?
Well, actually, we just bombarded Otto with photos, and he pretty much chose the photos. Yeah. I have to give him credit. What you see is pretty much what he picked and put in there. Now, obviously, he chose most of my daughter's photos because I did give him a few simple iPhone photos that were not stacked.
Yep.
That were, they look pretty good for the most part. I think he might have used maybe one or two in there somewhere. I can't remember for sure, but he pretty much chose the photos. And I kind of knew that the lead photo would probably be my Gene's neighborhood grocery store, because we did an article on that in Craftsman a few months before on how I built that, how I not scratch built it, but kit bashed using three Walthers kits. And I figured he probably put that on there, and he did. And actually, the photo he chose on there, I've got like 20 some puck lights on my ceiling, and then there's one LED light in the middle of the room that came, with the house when we bought the house, and we decided to turn all those puck lights off and just turn that one light on. And the shadow and the setting that it was able to give you, it was amazing. And that's what you're seeing there in that photo. That's just one LED light in the ceiling.
That's amazing. Yeah, because I'm looking at this first photo that you're talking about, and right across the street is your garage, and you can see the shadow of the sign that comes out from the front of the building.
Right,
and the shadow's right across the bay door, and it just sets a mood, a tone. It's so well done, and kudos to both of you on an excellent job capturing these photos and giving us a lot to look at. So a couple things I'll say about it. When I looked at this article, if you took the layout, the track plan off of page 41, and I'm not to say we'll go back to that and how great that is, but if you took that off, and I'm flipping through this book, I would have thought your layout is massive, right?
Yeah.
You just get that impression.
I get that a lot.
Right. You think that this thing, you've probably got a massive size house and some unbelievable real estate, but in reality, it's not. It's what
very, very small.
So
it's 11. It's 11 feet 4 inches on one side, 10 feet down the middle, and 8 feet on the third side of the U shape. So, it's about 30 feet long is all. And the entire layout is only 16 inches deep.
So that was my first impression. It was like, wow, this guy's got a huge layout. In reality, it's not huge. It's for what you describe, and we'll get into that. Perfect. Scott Thornton with yet another excellent job of putting a track plan together. And he does such a neat job of doing these overhead aerials. So that was also good. Did you provide him the photos and he put it together? So
yes,
that's really cool. So another great job by Scott Thornton, who a couple episodes ago was on, and he's just a man of many talents. And so good to see that. And then the other thing the other impression I had of this was, he must have used sky replacement, but looking over your shoulder, it's your work. So I want to talk about your skies real quick, because they're just absolutely stunning. I mean, here comes the art teacher, not the writing, but the clouds in the sky. So I want you to talk a little bit about your skies, because they're absolutely amazing.
Well, I wanted to come up with something really quick and fast as a base. So I went to, my local hardware store, and I bought 3 gallons of paint, a dark gray, middle gray, and a light gray, almost a white. And I bought a narrow roller. And after I put the masonite up, by the way, I used a white masonite instead of the typical brown. Now, I'm not sure I would use white again if I had to. It worked out okay, but I don't know. There were some things about it that I wasn't sure that I really liked. But back to the sky, I rolled all 3 of these colors on pretty much at the same time when they were all wet. Okay. So most artists will tell you usually start with your lighter colors first and then go to your darker colors. And I started out with white, and then I went to the middle gray and then dark gray, and I just started rolling them back and forth and blending them in. And then I would take a fairly wide paintbrush, and start kind of going up and down in different ways to kind of blend everything in.
You were trying to describe about a 3 or 4 inch brush. Is that what you?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So rolling all 3 colors in horizontally, and then taking a 3-4 inch wide brush and doing some vertical brush strokes to kind of blend the 3 colors in a little bit. That gave me a very cloudy, very dreary, dark looking sky. After about a day of drying, and the 3 colors that I had, you could see the highlights on the top of my clouds. Let me get you can see the highlights back there on the tops.
Right.
The white showed through, and the middle grays, the dark gray showed through okay. But what I did after that is I basically just did an artist oil painting on top of all that. So that was my base. And then the next day I took my oil paints. I had a titanium white. I had lamp black. I had some blues, different colors. And I just started going over all of the base colors that I rolled on the day before, and highlighting the tops of the clouds with the white, darkening the bottoms with a little bit of the black mixed with the white. And then I painted in the patches of blue, making sure that along the very top part of the backdrop, the blue was dark. And then along the bottom of the backdrop, along the tops of the tree line, the blue was lighter, to show some what they call atmospheric perspective. And that's the basics of the sky.
So So what you look at versus what I look at, and this must be that, that 35 years as an art teacher. Like I would think, okay, blue, then you add the clouds to the blue and you saw it. And I guess that's just, and I'm not sure how exactly to phrase this question or even this statement, I guess, or maybe it's part both here, but it's like what your eye is able to pick up. I mean, not just your sky. Sky is the example we were talking about, but even in your weathering and everything else, that you have that artistic eye. You're seeing it differently than, say, the average person like me, who just looks at it and goes, okay, it's the sky, blue background, clouds, paint the clouds. And it just gives you such a great advantage. And, how does I guess in a simpler way, I guess, how does that develop, the things that how you start to see those things from an artistic perspective?
Oh, wow. That's a hard one to answer. I guess I could just naturally see things better than others. And when I was teaching art, I tried to get that across to my kids with the simple lesson of drawing a tree.
Yeah.
I would instruct them to look outside the window and look at the trees. And I said, now really look at the trees. Just don't look at it and say, tree. Look at it. Yeah. Look at all the branches and the twigs. I said, now you could see branches that are coming out of the trunk towards you. You can see branches coming out of the trunk going away from you, and you can see them going out to the sides. I said, now, and I took my chalk and I drew a real simple tree with a little hole.
Yeah.
And the blob and the little red apples, the typical tree that a lot of kids would probably draw, because that's
probably one I would draw, but go ahead.
And I say, a lot of you would draw this because you're not looking at it. I said, you're just thinking tree.
Yes.
And that's it. I said, now, if you look out there, you can see that it doesn't look like this. Yeah. Now, some people have the ability to see things better than others. But that doesn't mean you can't train yourself to see these things. You could train yourself. I've seen so many people become really good artists that when they were in school, they couldn't draw anything. They would have never guessed in a million years that they would be an artist someday. So it's really a matter of looking and observing carefully what you're seeing. When I see objects that are weathered, I notice the rust. I notice how the streaks go down the sides. All of those little details. One of the things that I think I have, my art professor told me one time back in college, that he said that even a lot of artists don't have this, what he called a photographic memory. Mm-hmm. And he felt that I had that. He says, you have a photographic memory. He says, you could look at things and recall them 20 years later and paint them as if you saw them yesterday. And that's probably one of the things that has helped me quite a bit with my scenery and weathering and those sort of things, and building a model railroad. I always tell people, I will get these questions occasionally. Well, I don't remember this being, that heavily weathered, or I don't remember seeing this, or I don't remember seeing that. And, I always tell people, if it's on my railroad, I've seen it. Believe me, if it's on my railroad, I've seen it somewhere, sometime in the past.
Right. I think what you're talking about, when you go to the ultimate thing, and I know it from photography, I know it a little bit from model railroading, and as I'm progressing and learning in the hobby, it's a discipline of looking at things deeper and looking at the layers and levels of things instead of just that simple thing. Like even, train photography, I'll go out, and before it was, train, click. Oh, train.
Right.
Then it was like, okay, train's not here yet. What else? What is going to tell the story of this moment when the train's going to come and pass me? What's the story here? That it's passing through a small town, that it's going over a river, and the structures that were built to make this happen, and just just in general that idea, the discipline of drilling down to look at it more than just grain mill, rail car drops off grain. Look at everything around it, the age of the building, the bushes, everything that just makes up that entire composition.
You nailed it right there, because I will add to that. I hear this a lot. People will say too many details are distracting from the trains, or you don't want clouds in your sky. You don't want detailed backdrops because they will be a distraction. They'll grab your attention away from this and that. And I tell them no, I will say that's a bunch of baloney because as an art teacher, I look at the entire scene, the entire composition. Every single part of your model railroad has a purpose and a reason, and it all works together. The sky tells a story. Did a cold front just go through? Is it one of those colder, cooler, cloudy days? Yeah. Is it a sunny, hot, warm day? The trees tell a story. The backdrop details tell a story. All of your details, for example, everything that is in front of my country store, there's nothing there that would be considered too much clutter. It's stuff that was seen in front of the stores back in the 70s and 80s. You've got ice machines, you've got pop machines, you've got the wooden cases with the pop bottles, you've got the newspaper machines, which we don't see pretty much nowadays. A trash can, a broom, some chairs for the locals to sit out there with a bottle of pop and talk with each other for a while on a nice afternoon, after they get off work or if they're retired, they go for a walk or whatever and stop by.
Right.
It's an older store. It's in its last days. And in the 60s, 70s, and even 80s in Plymouth, my hometown, we still had a lot of neighborhood groceries, little grocery stores in all the different neighborhoods on the north side, south, east, west side of town. And when you started getting into the 80s, they were starting to become a little, run down. Windows were boarded up, especially if there's a second floor. The second floor wasn't used much for anything other than maybe storage. Mm-hmm. So I try to portray that feeling a little bit with some of the buildings as if they're kind of on their last day. The Hawks Garage, very typical of what I have seen many times throughout my life, where a business started in a cement block building, and then they purchased the building next door, bust a hole in the wall and use it for more room to work on equipment. And then, they buy the next building down. Before you know it, they own the whole block.
Right.
And all the buildings are all different, but they all have a reason or a purpose of why they were all purchased and put together. The typical things like that is what I try to model. Yeah, they all tell a story. Like I said, all the details, everything. What's your era that you're modeling? What time of year are you modeling? The pumpkins that I've added recently.
Right.
It tells you that you're modeling October.
Absolutely. And that's it. You were saying it just as I was about to say it, but we said it together, telling the story. And I do have a question. What led you to for the Cass County? What was the decision to stay in 1978? Was there a special meaning to 78 to you, or? Well,
actually, 78. But I'm kind of I'm going to move it to around 1980 to 82.
Okay.
I'm trying to aim at that sweet spot where a lot of your short lines were starting to pop up everywhere. 1978 is pushing it just a little bit. A lot of the old Penn Central lines were abandoned around the Logansport area in the county, and some of the short lines were just beginning at that time. For example, the Erie Western started in 77, I believe. The KBS, Kankakee, Beaverville, and Southern started in 77, 78. The Hillsdale County was somewhere in that area. They were just starting. And I decided that with my locomotives having their own paint scheme instead of just being some kind of a former Penn Central patch or a Conrail patch, I needed to move forward about another 3 or 4 years to justify more of that short line existence, if that makes sense. Plus, I really like those Rapido Chevy Caprice automobiles.
I do too.
I've got too many Fords and Jeeps on my layout. I needed some more Chevys.
There you go. Yeah, I joke with that. Got to get somebody to 3D print a Frank Drebin for me and put one of those Chevy Caprices on my layout for the Naked Gun. But
yeah,
talking about the Cass County and the story you created, that's got to be the obviously you've got a creative side in you, but it must have been just another an itch that had to be scratched to create a freelance railroad versus just an out of the box. You could have went with Penn and you could have just modeled Penn, but that you wanted to do something completely different and kind of own it.
Right. Yeah, I've always been a fan of freelance. I call it prototype freelancing. Freelancing is good as long as you keep it within those prototype parameters. You don't want it to get too wild and too carried away. When I was doing the Logansport Indiana Northern back in Indiana, it kind of got away from me. There was I had a lot of friends that were kind of using that theme a little bit, and it just started getting too big, and they were all having fun with it, and I was quite happy with that. I just felt the need that I had to go and change, and I wanted to choose something that had a lot smaller feel to it, and I felt that something like Cass County, it just sounds like a small railroad compared to Logansport and Indiana Northern. Right. That, like I said, there was Hillsdale County, there was the Lenawee County, there was a lot of quote unquote county short lines around in the late 70s, early 80s. And they were all very small railroads. So I decided that with most of the lines being spurs and things serving elevators and ag-related industries in Logansport and in the surrounding part of the county, why not call it Cass County? Because Logansport is in Cass County. There was a railroad about 10 miles from my house up there in Indiana, in Rochester, Indiana. It was called the Fulton County, and it's operated now by the Elkhart and Western out of Argus, Indiana. So it's like a 13-mile line from Argus to Rochester, and they only, I think they make only one or two runs to Rochester a week. They used to service the elevators there, but they no longer do. I think most of the elevators are now trucking everything, but there's a scrapyard there, and they do deliver gons to the scrapyard. And they do deliver a covered hopper to be loaded with birdseed and things at one of the plants, and that's about it. Mm-hmm. So I kind of wanted to get back to something smaller and kind of keep it to myself and not allow it to kind of get out there where others could grab it and kind of do their own thing with it.
Right. Well, I tell you one thing I can say: you've sold the small railroad thing with that whole concept with the logo, very simple, the keystone with Cass County Railroad in it, and then you've got a scheme on the locomotive. I mean, yeah, what are you using for a base color? Is it like a
black?
Just a black, and and then very simple sans serif font. This is Cass County on it, and a locomotive number, and the logo on the side and front of the nose. I'm sure it's on the long hood at the end as well. Very simple. It doesn't have to be overly wild to come up with something freelance and call it your own. And it sells it. Yeah.
Especially in the late 70s and early 80s. A lot of short lines didn't have the money to do all of this fancy stuff. So just I decided to use a basic kind of a Pennsylvania Railroad scheme with the deluxe gold lettering and the red keystone. And, some future locomotives that I might do, I may follow the Pennsylvania practice and leave the Cass County off the side of the long hood and just put the keystone in a couple of spots, and that's it.
Okay. But yeah, they wouldn't have had a huge marketing budget. They certainly wouldn't have had anybody doing a whole lot of wild graphics for them. They would have just had something very basic, and it sells it. It definitely has that look of a very small railroad with not a huge budget, and great job.
And I don't use a caboose, even though the caboose didn't officially come to an end until in the 90s, maybe. I can't remember. A lot of the short lines in the 70s did not use a caboose.
Yep.
So I talked to the people at the Kankakee, Beaverville, Southern, even though they own one, they never used it on their trains.
Right.
And I know a couple of the Erie Western never did either. So
one of the things, and go back to this track plan that I'm flipping through. I've been sitting here and listening to you, and I've been going just back and forth looking at these photos because they're just so amazing and such a job so well done. And I sure hope you find a way to share out some of your other techniques, whether it be in print or other types of media, because you've really nailed it. The weathering, the scenes, the composition, it just really is fantastic. One thing you talked about in the article, and the idea of minimalism, and minimalism, within a layout design. And I want to talk a little bit about that as you move to Florida, you build this layout and set it up. What were some of the things that you had in mind when it comes to that?
Okay. I'll backtrack just a little bit to the layout in Indiana. That layout was nearly 100 feet in length. Mm-hmm. So not necessarily a small railroad,
right?
But it was small in that it was very narrow. Mm-hmm. There were several locations on that layout that were only 6 to 8 inches deep. Most of it was only 12. I had 2 spots that were about 16 inches deep, but the length of that 16 inches was about maybe 3 to 4 feet, and that was it. So it was very, very narrow, and it was easy to maintain. I think on that layout, I only had, I think 12 or 13 switches total. But it was easy to wire. All of the switches were manual because building a railroad for basically just one person to operate or two, you want to provide as much work as possible. That's, kind of what Lance Minheim kind of preaches a little bit on his layout with the padlocks for the switches and all the little things you've got to do to operate the railroad. So yeah, you got to throw your own switches and uncouple your cars. But the wiring was very basic, very simple. The track was easy to clean. It was the railroad was easy to maintain and keep clean. So moving to Florida, I knew that was not going to be possible, having 100 feet of railroad. We don't have basements down here.
Right.
Now there are some areas that do, but in my area, no. And so what I have is either a spare bedroom or the garage.
Right.
And I want to tell you that garage is no place to be in the summertime in Florida.
I can only imagine. Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yep.
So I had this 11 by 10 spare bedroom, and I am 70 years old. I'm not getting any younger. And I decided that I'm going to maintain that minimalist approach, keeping the layout narrow, keeping it simple, having a minimal amount of switches, keeping the switching operations to, a reasonable amount of time for me, about an hour.
Right.
And keeping the wiring on this railroad is so simple. I mean, it's so basic. I think my dog probably could have wired all this up. But, and my switches are Pico switches. I throw them manually.
Yeah.
I actually used Rapido switch stands. They're brass, and I had to solder them together and everything. But I actually turn the targets.
Oh, nice.
Manually when I throw the switch. I could have had the push-pull knobs, and I could have done all that, but I wanted more work to do on the layout. When I throw a switch, I want to throw the switch. I want to turn the target, and take the time for the brakeman to walk the train to do this or that before, the locomotive starts moving, for its next move. I only have 6 switches total on this whole railroad, and 3 grain elevators, a fertilizer facility, and I have a few other spots for odds and ends. I have an auger where I could unload feed. I have an area where I could spot a 2 or 3 box cars if I want for some type of unloading. But it takes if I operate the entire railroad, it takes about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. And I use a proto throttle, and I've got everything set up where everything runs really, really slow. And or I could just operate one side of the layout. Let's just say if I just want to spend a half hour, I've got other things I want to do. So I'll spend a half hour, grab 2 or 3 covered hoppers, spot them at the 2 grain elevators, pick up anything that needs to be picked up, return it to my interchange, and I'm done.
I'll tell you, I was thinking that's exactly what my thought was when I saw your track plan. One is, where the heck is the rest of it? Because all these pictures make it look like it's massive. But then when I saw the track plan, I'm like, and then I see you in the room now and getting a better idea, just that instant on idea that, my good friend Joe Mammy talks about a lot. And I know he's picked it up, and he's been influenced by several others who have had that idea of being able to just go over, you got 10 or even just 10, 15 minutes, and you just want to just scratch the itch for a few moments.
Right.
Just flip the layout on, go over, switch a few cars out, even if you're just spotting some cars that are already there, and it just scratches the itch, and you have that ability. You don't have to start a major production to get your layout going. It's all right there and easy for you to do. So exactly, you built a layout for yourself, for your desire.
Right. Yeah. Especially at my age. I mean, if I was younger, I would probably think more along the lines of something that would provide more of an operating session for 3 or 4 people. That's about the maximum for me, 3 or 4 people. I'm not a big operator. I've never gotten into these big, model railroads where, you have 10, 15 operators.
Yeah.
I love the layouts. I have nothing against them. It's all my problem. I get stressed out. I mean, I do. I don't. Yeah. I don't understand a lot of the details of operating big railroads with what do they call it, TT and TO, train orders and all this stuff. I'm always afraid that I'm going to mess something up, and you know, so yeah, I kind of get stressed out when I get into the big layout operations. So I've always been a short line, branch line type of operator, a laid back type of railroad operation.
Well, it certainly seems, and I want to make sure that I clarify too that I certainly I admire the big empires that some of these guys have built. They're beautiful and amazing and very fun to run when you put big trains and run them. And there's a certain thing to that, but the popularity and it kind of shows through the group there. That we were talking about the HO scale shelf layout group on Facebook. 14,000 members on there. And it just seems like this is the concept of minimalism, the smaller layouts, the narrow shelf layout is really, it's increased because it seems doable, whether you're 70 or 40 or even 25 and in your, or younger in your first apartment and you still want to scratch the itch that there's a way to get into this hobby that doesn't require you to have a massive basement or an attic or an outbuilding. There's a way to get it done.
Right. Exactly. And that's why, I push this minimalist approach to these narrow shelf layouts. My friend Jim Six is kind of come around to that now. And like, Scott Thornton, James McNabb, and all these guys, and I call it the Iowa Interstate crew. I think some of those guys influenced me quite a bit too. Lance Midheim with his minimalist approach. I've always enjoyed that simplicity, and like this layout right here, I can go through and clean my track in about maybe 2 or 3 minutes. And what I do, I never get any of that black stuff. My track is really clean, but I use those Mr. Clean white erasers, sponge erasers.
Okay.
I cut them down to little squares, and I just run that on the top of all my rails. I use a real long screwdriver. I get this light up here.
Yep.
and I just run that over the top of my rails to remove that little tiny layer of dust. Because dust is a problem down here in Florida. I never thought it would be, but it is. With central air and everything, I've never had central air before. Up in Indiana, we had those split things.
Yep.
But it takes me 2 to 3 minutes to clean my track. I could go through and dust off all of the tops of my buildings and my automobiles and different details in just less than 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. Everything's glued down. I don't have to worry about sucking anything up with the sweeper if I go over it with the sweeper or move things with a brush. Right. So yes, it's so many advantages to a small layout.
Right. Like you said, you got to know what your goals are.
Right.
When you go to build a layout, you knew what yours were, which was to be able to stay in the hobby and build and really have an outlet for this talent you have to. Again, I sure do. I hope there's yet more articles coming from you. I know you weren't big on writing, but boy, you got a lot to show here and a lot to share. So I hope you do that. Because benefit to all of us to be able to see these photos and be inspired by them. So thank you for that.
Well, I've got some plans, future plans for RMC, some maybe smaller, how-to articles. And I've been working with Joe Fugate a little bit on MRH and maybe come up with some things there in the future. So yeah, there's things, there's plans for some things in the future. I just don't know what and where and when.
Well, we won't commit you to them, but it's good to hear that there's future plans because there's a lot. There's a lot here. I want to ask before we wrap up here. One thing that's obviously clear on your layout is your love of grain elevators.
Oh yes.
So what did that, I mean, when you were growing up, I mean, I think we talked about it a little bit, but there's just, how many grain elevators are on your layout?
Three.
And they're just beautiful. And all three different style. It's just, you've done very well with just keeping them all different, but yet, all kind of, sellable to that area. I'm partial to the Wayne feeds and the fade you've done at the top of the building with the sign. And,
okay.
That's just great because it's so simple, but yet it's done.
I grabbed that off of Google Images. I just found it in Google Images, and I printed it on a matte photo paper and peeled off a lot of the thickness on the back, sanded it down really, really thin, and attached it to the side of the building using, believe it or not, I used that Woodland Scenics tacky glue, because once you put it on, it's kind of like Elmer's glue, still a little wet, and I could position the sign and get it centered before, it starts getting tacky, and then you can't move it anymore.
Right.
If I had to do it over again, now I know there are a lot of resources out there for people that could make decals.
Right.
But at that time, I didn't know a lot of people that could make decals. That was, a couple of years ago, but now I do know I have some names in mind now that I could go to if I wanted to try it. But the paper worked out really well. If you get it thin enough, it's every bit as good as a decal.
I'd say the end result is absolutely fine. That looks fantastic.
Right.
Just faded out at the top where the sign could probably needs to be painted, but there ain't no time for that. They've got work to do. So the sign stays a little faded from all that Indiana weather throughout the years, wearing it down.
Plus, some people might say, well, three grain elevators that close together, is that possible? And yes, it is, because in Plymouth we had 3 grain elevators all within 3 blocks. There were 2 that were actually across the street from each other. And one of them is the elevator I used to visit quite a bit. I would go up and watch the farmers bring their trucks in to dump the corn in the pit in front of the elevator. And then across the street was an older one that was no longer used, but it has, it wasn't too far in the past that it was still in use. And then about 2 blocks away was a third one.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of other towns that I'm familiar with that had 2 or 3 elevators, smaller elevators. None of them were big. And then when I got married, my father-in-law was a farmer, and I helped him farm quite a bit. And we, used to haul corn, beans into the local elevator. So I was able to learn a lot about the, ins and outs of an elevator and how they operate and what goes on. So
amazing. Yeah. And it's great when you're able to incorporate your memories into your layout as well. Things that, bring memories back to life. And that's fantastic. Tom, I want to thank you again for coming on Around the Layout, sharing the story of your layout and how you've progressed, and you've given us a lot to think about and definitely absorb, and look forward to the next pieces that come out from you, and some photos of now an autumn scene on your layout. And I'm certainly looking forward to seeing that.
Well, I'll be sharing some pictures on Facebook. I did put that country store up on as my banner photo last night, showing the fall colors, and you'd be able to compare that to the one that's in the magazine there, and you could see the differences. In fact, I think I'm going to post 2 pictures, one in the summer and one in the fall, so people could look at both of them and compare them, and maybe decide which one they like best.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I will definitely share some of the photos as well on our Facebook page, and a link to see more of Tom's work. Again, Tom, thanks for being on Around the Layout.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And like I said, model railroading is fun. There's always room for a railroad. Build it. Just don't sit around, think about it, build it. Even if it's just a little angle nook or just a small layout, just build something that you can have fun and mess around with here and there and enjoy it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. You'll find more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Learn more about the show and check out past and future episodes on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks again for hanging out with us around the layout.